Hello, everybody, and welcome in to another episode of the Lions Grid. Your two hosts here today, as always, Kevin Marheine and Joe Wilmot. Over there to my, I guess it's technically my right. It's my left on my screen. Get all discombobulated. But we're back here once again for episode 7. Hard to believe we've already had 7 episodes in this young preseason. But we're storming our way through here, building up to the first preseason game, which will be tomorrow against the Patriots. But today, me and Joe are going to take a look here at some of the preseason roster battles, some of the position battles that you should keep your eye on as we as we start to get into this preseason, and some things to keep your eye on as you're watching the Lions go at it. So. Without further ado, Joe, I'm going to go ahead and throw up a screen here, and then we'll sort of get into it. But you can see on your screen right now we do have 4 numbers, 90, 31, 53, and 46. You might be saying, what are these numbers? Why are they important? Well, the 90 there is the number of players each team can have on their roster during the preseason. The 31 there is for August 31st. That is the date in which teams must cut their roster down to the 53 regular man roster that they will be using throughout the season. That cutoff time is at 4 p.m. Eastern Time on the 31st. The 53, as I mentioned, is the number of players that teams can have on their regular season roster, and 46 is the number of players that can dress for each game. So even though you can have 53 players on your regular season roster, only 47 of them can dress for each game. And Joe, I know we were talking before the show, but that sort of, I never knew what the specific number was until I looked it up just before the show, but it is surprising that, you can have 53 people on your roster, but only 46 of them can dress.
Yeah, I just went off of Madden, and it's like in the preseason, it's like 75-man roster. I was like, okay, so everybody must have 75 people. And then it's like during the regular season, you have 53 that dress in that in the roster, and it's like, okay, well, I'll just go off that. That's my knowledge. It's got to be right? But apparently, it's a little bit different.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting. You would think, especially with the NFL and Madden have a very close relationship, so you would think it would be. I think most things in Madden are pretty realistic and accurate to the way things are set up in the NFL. So it is a little surprising to see.
I think it's just tough to find like all the names and create all the players of the 90 people for each team if they're only going to have 53 come the start of the season. So like, why bother creating the extra 20 or 25 people?
That's an excellent point. I think you
for
look
each
at it,
team, yeah.
Yeah, if you look at it that way, I mean, of those 90 guys, the people that don't make the 53-man roster, how many of them are ever going to see any real NFL playing time? If you have all their likenesses and things like that built into the game, obviously you got to pay royalties and things like that. So I think you might be right, spot on there, that it might be just a way to avoid some of the pitfalls and perils of trying to get everybody included inside of the game. I think it might be a move by their part, just like you said, to sort of cut down on that, because obviously, by the time the season starts, by August 31st, a large portion of that 90-man roster is going to be cut, and a lot of them aren't going to be, picking up with another team. Some of them certainly will pick up with either the practice team for the Lions, or may pick up with a practice team somewhere else, or maybe even make the active 53-man roster for another squad. But
and if some long shot comes in and makes the team, then that's when they'll create the play.
Certainly. That's one of the nice things, especially about the more recent Maddens. Ever since the internet has improved so drastically over the course of our lives. Back in the day when Madden was just getting online, they didn't have the updated rosters, but nowadays they're constantly updating the rosters and balancing everything. So you can, if there is, just like you said, that guy that comes out of nowhere, you're sure that they'll get him added in. So what we'll do now is we'll sort of talk about some of the positions, and we'll start on the defensive side of the ball that you should be keeping an eye on here as the preseason gets underway. So we'll take a look first here at the cornerback position. That's the first battle to keep your eye on. And obviously here, in terms of that position battle, your locks for the cornerback position are going to be Darius Slay. I think it's safe to say Justin Coleman and Rashawn Melvin. Both of those were two big free agent acquisitions. Definitely going to be there. I think Justin Coleman will probably be playing in the slot, and you'll probably see Rashawn Melvin lining up across from Darius Slay as the second guy covering the second best receiver on the team, and then of course the rookie out of Penn State, Umani Uware. He'll definitely be making the team, and then you have a lot of guys in the mix after that. You have the punt returner, kick returner, special teams guy Jamal Agnew, Marcus Cooper, Tease Tabor, Mike Ford, D Virgin, Andre Chichare, David Jones, and the undrafted rookie Josh Miller. So Joe, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 guys potentially competing outside of the 5 that I already mentioned are probably locks to make that 53-man roster. That's a lot of competition there for what could potentially be 1 or 2 roster spots.
Yeah, I'm thinking, if you're a cornerback, you got to play well because you really only need 6 of them on the team. 5 of them, but 6 is like generous. Jamal Agnew is slotted as a cornerback, and if he makes the team this year as a kick returner, which we'll get into later, then there's your 6th or 5th corner. But I think this is a make or break season for Tease Tabor because, if I'm not mistaken, this is now his 3rd season.
I believe so.
Yeah, this is now his 3rd season. He was a rookie. We had high praise for him. Thought he was going to, get into the system and play well enough to be a number 4 or 5 guy. And not really the case over the last couple of seasons. Even when we saw he did have limited action last year, he played, how you would expect somebody who's rated 68 overall to play from the Madden rating. He had a couple passes deflected, but, he had limited action and was going up against the 3rd or 4th or 5th wide receiver. So, and it was when we were depleted on the secondary, and we needed to use every guy we still had on the team. I think he made the team last year because we lacked depth. Adding 2 more guys this season that are for sure going to make the team is going to put him on the bubble of whether or not we need to keep him if we're keeping Jamal Agnew around.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's 3, definitely time to put up or shut up at this point. I do know that obviously he's a Bob Quinn guy, so that might help him out in the long run as they go to solidify the roster. But certainly something to a guy that should be worried here because roster spots are going to be at a premium, and as we mentioned, there's 8 other guys competing there for him on top of the guys that are already locks to make the roster. So certainly will be interesting to see what happens there. So we'll go ahead and we'll take a look at the next position on that defense to keep an eye on in terms of a crowded list of characters that'll be trying to fit the team, and that is going to be the safety spot. So taking a look here, obviously, in terms of locks, we've talked about it. Quandre Diggs has sort of established himself as being one of the 2 starting safeties. I think he'll obviously be making the regular roster. Then you have Tracy Walker, who should make the team. And then, of course, Will Harris, who they drafted this year, should be a pretty solid lock at that point. And then here's some guys who may be on that bubble. Tavon Wilson, he did take a bit of a pay decrease to stay with the team already this offseason. But with them drafting Will Harris, it could be a sign that, even though he took a pay cut, he might not be so lucky to make it through the preseason, stick with the main roster. And then you also have Andrew Adams, who we have we picked up from Tampa Bay in free agency. Charles Washington, who is a guy who's big on the special teams. And then David Jones, I believe, another undrafted rookie there. So, again, another position in the secondary where there's a number of guys potentially competing for a spot. Again, I think Tavon Wilson may be the most likely casualty just due to the cap. Even though he did take a decrease there in pay, he's still, I believe, one of the bigger paychecks there of those guys who are sort of on the bottom tier. But as we've sort of mentioned in some of the other episodes, Joe, we're looking for somebody outside of Quandre Diggs to step up and really assert themselves as that number 2 starter as a safety.
Yeah, number one thing is you have to know the playbook. Number 2 is you have to play somewhat decent. Number 3, if you want to make the team, chances are if you're not going for the starting position, if those are already taken, which one of the safety positions is open, I think it's which one's open? Is it free safety or is Quandre Diggs the strong safety? I think Quandre Diggs is the strong safety.
Yeah, I'm not sure of the specifics. I think it makes it difficult to keep track just because I think Patricia switches them around a little bit. So I'm not sure which ones. I'm not sure which one's which in Madden.
Yeah, in Madden he's the strong safety, but yeah, there's going to be a battle at free safety, but in order to make the team, you have to be good at special teams. That's going to be the make or break. That's on the bubble. Going to football practice, and I know it's August, and the Clarkson Wolves are right down the field, or right down the street, and they're practicing their football for their football season. And one thing KR always said was, when we played for him was, if you want to have playing time, get involved with special teams. If you're one of those guys that is not a starter, special teams is where you can get playing time. I think it translates to the NFL as in, if you're on the bubble of a roster position, but you're really good at special teams, chances are you'll make the team, even if somebody's maybe better at the positional player than you. Chances are they're going to go with the starter starting all those games and lock him as the number 1 and lock you in as a special teams player and backup if needed.
Yeah, most certainly. I think, if you're going head to head with somebody, and you're going and you're the coach and you're checking the box and they're going head to head, and then you come down to who can play special teams, that most certainly can be the difference between you making that 53-man roster or you looking for a new team. So certainly a chance for, I think, a lot of these guys will be looking at maybe the thing that decides whether or not they are with the team for the regular season is what they can contribute on that special teams front. So a great point there from you, Joe. So we'll run through the offensive side of the ball now. Of course, one of the biggest position battles to keep your eye on is going to be who is going to be the starting left guard. Joe, obviously we've talked about it. TJ Lang retiring leaves a hole. Graham Glasgow should be sliding over to take TJ Lang's spot. At least that's where he's been practicing so far here to start the preseason. So that leaves a hole on the left side of the line. Right now, Kenny Wiggins seems like he's going to be the guy to replace him. He is from the first depth chart, he is the guy that's slotted in there. But there's a whole list of characters who could potentially either be could supplant him as the starter, or they could, they're going to be fighting each other to try and be the backup there. So along with Kenny Wiggins, who is the presumed starter there at the left guard spot, you do have Ode Obashi. We have Joe Dahl, who we've talked about. Leo Kolomantanji. He's got a real long name there. Bo Benchwal. And then Luke Bawanko, who we actually picked up in free agency from Washington. So he's a guy who's seen a lot of who's actually seen some playing time. So, they might be considered long shots to take down Kenny Wiggins, who at the moment seems to have a handle on that spot. But certainly, I think preseason is going to be big towards deciding who is going to be that starting left guard.
Yeah. Ode
Abushi?
Ode Abushi. He's an interesting name. He's somebody new on my radar on the Lions grid. He's somebody that you don't really know too much about. And actually, watching the training camp projected starters the other day, when they had the joint practice between the Patriots and the Lions, they had him projected as the starter.
Oh, nice.
So I don't know where they're getting their information from, but I also heard good things about Joe Dahl. Throughout the offseason that he's, put on some strength. He's a little bit more agile and, going into his third year, I think he's another one of those guys that was in that draft class with Tease Tabor and it's kind of make or break seasons for them. He might be on the bubble of making the team, but if he has a good preseason, he could very well end up being the starter. And personally, I'd like to see a Joe be the starter on the Lions.
Yeah, and I think an interesting thing there too. Obviously, in addition to him being a Joe and his potential there to be a starter, there's also the fact that he did just get a contract extension. He is a Quinn product. Quinn drafted him. He's extended him. There's some signs that maybe Joe Dahl might be able to. They're at least keeping him around beyond the season. There's certainly a chance that he could become that left guard. But it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, and I think a lot of it's going to come down to their play in the preseason. Moving on to the next position, we'll take a look here. Tight end. Now, obviously, we've been talking about the tight end quite a bit in our videos with the acquisition of T.J. Hawkinson in the draft and Jesse James in free agency. They're the two big names. But this position battle actually extends beyond them because there are 4 other tight ends besides those 2 on the roster. So who's going to be potentially that third guy on the Lions roster? Well, there's plenty of options. You have Logan Thomas, who is the former Virginia Tech quarterback who's converted to tight end. There's Isaac Nwada, who we drafted out of Georgia just this year. A lot of people will remember that we drafted T.J. Hawkinson because it was in the first round. But we did take a second tight end in Isaac Nwada. Jerome Cunningham, who was the only tight end that was on the 2018 roster. And then Austin Taylor, who we got from Denver. So there are 4 other guys there that are going to be competing for a roster spot. I think the 2 front runners are Logan Thomas and Isaac Nwada. Obviously, we drafted Isaac Nwada, so we feel pretty strongly about him, even though it was in the later rounds. I believe it was either the 6th or 7th round. We had 2 picks in both of those, so I can't remember which. But he was either a 6th or 7th round pick. And then Logan Thomas, he's actually been with the Lions before as a tight end after he converted. It was 2017, I believe he was briefly with the team, and we were going to move him to the practice squad, but he actually got picked up by the Buffalo Bills, and he spent the last 2 seasons with Buffalo. So, a guy that we have some familiarity with, but I think those 2 are probably your 2 front runners. But it's, obviously the big buzz is going to be around T.J. Hawkinson and Jesse James. I think most people are going to be excited to see them. But that battle there, or the intrigue at tight end, I guess, goes deeper than just the surface level. There is going to be a little bit of a battle there for that 3rd roster spot. So something to keep your eyes on.
3rd or maybe 4, depending on how much they want to use for the run game. If some sets that you have in the single back formation give you 3 tight end sets. Now, we know in Matt Patricia's offense that he uses a fallback.
Yep.
So maybe instead of seeing 4 tight ends, we'll see 3 tight ends and a fallback. I know in years past, the Lions didn't even have a fallback, but Nick Baldwin this year is, penciled in as being the fullback. And I always like having a fullback on the team. It dates back to having Corey Schlesinger on the team. And he was a pretty good fullback. He could block, he could catch, he could run. He was an all-purpose fullback.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if you go with the fullback, which they're going to, the last year it was Nick Ballore out of Central Michigan that was their fullback. He also played special teams. I think that's a pivotal position to find the number 3 guy. But chances are, if you have those 2 that we've been talking about battling for the number 3 position, you could very well have 4 and have one of them be the backup to all 3 and have him be on special teams. You can't have too much depth at the tight end position. You got a run/blocker in T.J. Hawkinson. You got a receiving tight end. If the other 2 guys are good at blocking, you may just remove Jesse James from the run formations and use the other 2 as blocking tight ends.
Certainly an option, and I think you also hit the nail on the head there with Nwada. He's a guy who is known for his versatility, and rumor has it that he could be used as an H-back, so sort of a fullback hybrid. just because of some of his athleticism and things like that. So it's certainly an option. He could find, you could conceivably carry 4 by having Nuwata not only play tight end but split time as sort of the H-back and then special teams. So, it will be interesting to see. There is a potential to carve out another roster spot there. Teams just traditionally carry 3 tight ends on their 53-man roster. So, I think by their play, they'll definitely have a chance to potentially expand that out to 4 if there are 2 guys who come out and show that they're hungry for that that roster spot. Moving into the running back side of things, obviously Kerryon Johnson is the number 1 running back for the Lions. This is more so of who will be his primary backup. We talked about it a little bit last episode that C.J. Anderson could be a guy in short yardage who comes in. But if you look at C.J. Anderson, obviously he left the Broncos and signed a 1-year contract with the Carolina Panthers in 2018. He did not have a very good start to 2018, but he, of course, rebounded with the Rams there in the latter half of the season and into the postseason, filling in for Todd Gurley. So, hopefully for the Lions' sake, you're getting the C.J. Anderson from the back part of the year and not the C.J. Anderson who was with Carolina because wasn't the greatest. You also have Zach Zenner, so if for whatever reason C.J. Anderson seems to struggle, you could see him get the bulk of the carries. And, of course, there's also the rookie Ty Johnson, who's supposed to be a pretty speedy guy. He's probably the guy in most danger of not making the 53-man roster, but not to beat a dead horse, but with that speed, could certainly be a guy who could contribute on special teams.
Yeah, C.J. Anderson had a great playoff run last year with the Rams. And Zach Zenner, he's played very well in some games where the first running back and the second running back were down with injuries. And he's picked up the yardages. He scored touchdowns. He showed brute force, like as a power back. He's also got a little bit of speed and elusiveness. He could very well be, your drawback. Like if you run a draw, he could be the draw guy, to do that. Ty Johnson, really you have to measure his speed. If he's as good or faster than Jamal Agnew, who was a Pro Bowl kick returner, punt returner last year, I really didn't see it from Jamal Agnew being that good of a punt returner, kick returner. I mean, I think he only had one, if that, that I can remember, and returned for a touchdown. And I personally like to see the rookie have the roster position. Let's go with 4 running backs, since it is a position where we do get injured. And, if we have Kerryon Johnson, who's a power back / elusive speed back, but more so power back, then we have a power back in C.J. Anderson and a power back in Zach Zenner. It'd be nice to have some speed out of the backfield.
Yeah, well, certainly he would give them another look there. So, it'll be interesting to keep your eye on. Obviously, I think the big thing is going to be trying to measure, what C.J. Anderson you're getting. Hopefully, like I said, he'll be the C.J. Anderson we saw with the Rams rather than the Panthers. Of course, things were made less complicated here recently with Theo Riddick being released. Obviously, if he was still in the mix, it would definitely be a pretty crowded backfield back there, so you'd have to feel that somebody would go. And it looks like Theo Riddick was that guy, so it'll be interesting to see if Ty Johnson, if he ends up being another guy let go and maybe signed with the practice team, or if he can find a spot on that 53-man active roster. Switching to wide receiver now. Again, this is another position where the starters, I think, are pretty solidified. You're looking at Marvin Jones Jr., Kenny Golladay, Danny Amendola. Those are your top 3 receivers. They're going to be the 3 main guys, the bread and butter of the offense, if you will. But that leaves some question marks as to who else will be able to make the roster. Now, Jermaine Kearse is a veteran receiver who they brought in. They're paying him $350,000 in guarantees. He's someone who's been underneath offensive coordinator Darrell Bevel in the past. I think he is a lock to make the team and probably be your fourth wide receiver. So then it becomes a question of most teams carry between 5 and 6 wide receivers. So who is going to be either that one guy, or if you can really impress, who are going to be the 2 guys that make the team? You have some different candidates there. Obviously, Andy Jones is a guy who's been around the last couple seasons, who's apparently been doing a better job catching the ball this offseason. So potentially, if he shows that in the games, he could earn himself a spot. Then you have the rookie Travis Fulgham. He's a pretty big receiver, could be a pretty good deep threat. So I think his somebody who can definitely go up and high point a ball. So I think his ability, his size, could be a lock to make the roster. But there's a lot of competition. Again, Andy Jones, Travis Fulgham, Brandon Powell, who we saw last season returning some kicks. Again, special teams coming into play. Chris Lacey and Tommy Lee Lewis are also competing for those roster slots. And Tommy Lee Lewis, Brandon Powell, 2 guys who can definitely play special teams as return men. And we'll lump this receiver conversation into the kick return conversation, which is a position to keep an eye on for another battle, just because I have a feeling that whoever does end up making the roster, especially if we do decide to carry 6 wide receivers, it's going to be a special teams related decision. You know, we've talked about how that's going to be an important factor for a lot of these bubble guys to make the team anyways. But if you do see a Brandon Powell, a Tommy Lee Lewis stick with the team, I definitely believe it will be as a kick returner, if not as the main return man, replacing, because Jamal Agnew has done he's done better on punts than he has kicks. Punt returns definitely seem to be his preferred job. He doesn't do the kick returns as well. So I would imagine you're either going to keep one of those guys as the kick returner, or potentially, if they're doing a good job at both, maybe they just replace Jamal Agnew and take over both spots. But I think, as I mentioned, I think your fourth guy is going to be Jermaine Kearse. So those other guys, whether it be Travis Fulgham sitting there as a the number 5 receiver, and then maybe bringing in one of these other guys to do kick return duty, that's really going to be who's going to show that they're the best return man this preseason. I think that'll determine this wide receiver position battle.
Yeah, last year I was a fan of Powell in the preseason, wanted him to make the team, and I think he made the practice squad and then played in the season after a couple guys got injured. Mm-hmm. But, I think that what we're seeing is, what the coaches see. Tough decisions all around the board on who to keep on the team. Cutting it down to 53-man roster out of 90 people that are trying out for the team. I mean, you have locks basically at every position on starting offense and starting defense, except for maybe 3 or 4 positions. But for everybody else that's on the bubble, it's like you'd like to have depth. You'd like to have versatility, and being a Patriot way, you'd like to incorporate a lot of different guys and their unique skill set into the game plan. Just keeping the right people on the team is going to be tough. And I think if you look at the kick return and the wide receiver, I don't know if Powell's going to be that guy. He's quick. He's not necessarily that fast. But as a receiver, he was more like a possession receiver. He could get open and he could catch the ball. Whether or not these guys have same camps as they did last year during the preseason is yet to be seen.
Yeah, most certainly. I think obviously there's a long way to go in this preseason. So these are just us sort of setting the table for you. These are some of the battles that are going to be going on. Hopefully we'll see some good competition in the actual preseason games, because I know there are open training camp practices and things like that, but I've never been to one. I don't know how many Detroit Lions fans get the opportunity to go to them. So for most of us, the preseason, the football games, those are where we see a lot of these battles play out. Obviously we can read articles on, whether it's from the Detroit News or, the Free Press or wherever it's coming from. Obviously you can read about practice, but for most of us, watching these preseason games is where we're going to get to see a lot of these guys who are on the bubble play. So it'll be interesting to keep an eye on these. Obviously we don't have a great insight into everything that's going on in training camp and some of the things they're doing there, but this is where they get to sort of put it all on display for us, the fans, and it'll be interesting to see how some of these battles shake out because, as you mentioned, Joe, it's a 90-man roster currently. You have to go down to 53. So people are going to have to be cut. Hard decisions are going to have to be made. And, you could conceivably have a pretty good preseason, and just because of, the needs of the team, potentially might not make the roster. So it's definitely, I don't know if you've ever seen the Hard Knocks. I know you have because we've talked about it. You were talking about the Raiders one. So I know you've seen it, but if you're someone who hasn't seen the Hard Knocks show that HBO does each year, it is sort of a brutal process. Guys are definitely out there giving their all, and then it's the unfortunate part of the business that you can't carry everybody onto your team. So it's tough, but I think there's lots to be excited about. I think we have some good talent that will be competing, and it'll be interesting to see how some of these battles shake out. So that will do it for us today. We will be back before the game tomorrow to do just a little preview episode for you. It should be a pretty light episode. Obviously, most of your starters aren't even going to be dressing. I don't think Tom Brady or Matt Stafford are even going to be in pads for the game. I know they've been suited up for the joint practices and things like that, but I think that's been the hardest part of their week. I don't think they'll actually see any game time with it being the first preseason game. So unfortunately we won't get to see everybody we're interested in, but it should be still a good chance to get acquainted with some of these new faces because there's been a lot of changes with the Lions organization. So that will do it for us. As always, want to thank everybody for tuning in, watching. If you did like the show, please do help the channel grow. Go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. As I've mentioned, we have a goal to reach that 100 subscriber mark because that's when we get our fancy custom URL for the channel. So please, 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 if you did enjoy the show, do hit that subscribe button. It helps us out tremendously. You get on the ground floor of us building this momentum for the Lions Grid, so that we can continue to hopefully make some pretty good content for you guys. And I know, Joe, I enjoy doing the show, and I know you're a big fan of the whole process. So we appreciate your support tremendously, and it means a great deal to us. So just want to thank you, and of course, if you haven't had a chance to subscribe, please consider doing so. So yeah, that will do it for this episode. 7 episodes already completed for the new season. We'll be back with episode 8 tomorrow to do the overview of the Patriots game.
On the 8th of August,
play
the Patriots.
It's all just coming together beautifully. 8th episode, 8th of August, 8th month of the year. It's like we planned it or something. I don't know. But we'll catch you during the next episode, and see you later.